Hello, good morning. My presentation today is going to be modern biomimetic science. Now I say modern, biomimetics is actually a very ancient practice. It's innate in every human. That is to take inspiration from natural things, from nature, and to use those in everyday life, in art, literature, architecture, and all those kind of things. This presentation is focused on modern aspects of biomimetics and the formation of biomimetics into a true science. So I'm going to talk about the history, include some current examples of where biomimetic thought or by-inspiration thought has been applied in technology. I will talk about its true usefulness and its impact in society as well as science and medicine. And I will touch on some of the theoretical aspects, some of the principles behind the theory, and some of the techniques, the practical techniques you can use to implement biomimetics in science, in medicine, in life in general. So the presentation will start with a definition. So what is biomimetics? Modern biomimetic science includes facts, theories, which can be experimentally tested. Sorry, I should say this is kind of the structure of the presentation. So I'll start off with the definition, then I'll talk about modern biomimetic science, facts, theory, and the experimental testing of those theories and those facts. I will include a section on the history of biomimetics. I will look at facts and explanations for biomimetics, and then I'll touch on some tools and techniques, the practical tools and techniques that you can use in biomimetic science, and you can apply those to any aspects of life, as I show you, to any industry, to medicine, to science, architecture, and all sorts of things. So I hope that there'll be quite a lot of technicalities, so I don't want to worry you too much with the technicalities, but I wanted to give you a broad kind of, and in some places detailed analysis and explanation of biomimetic science. But hopefully the take-home message will be that you understand kind of some of the modern principles behind biomimetic science, and hopefully you can then apply those to any aspect of your profession or your life. That's what I hope you can get from this lecture. So coming to the definition, it's always good to start with definitions of things. So what is biomimetics? So the word comes from the Greek bios, which means life, and mimesis, which is imitation. Imitating life. There are various kind of sayings to describe what biomimetics is. It's been described as learning from nature's best, to borrowing from nature, stealing from nature, and innovation inspired by nature. So there's lots of terms to describe this process of looking at nature, taking inspiration, taking ideas from nature, and applying them to our own life. So it directly relates to design of things and processes and systems from nature and applying those into manufacturing and technology. So in a nutshell, nature, of course, is a consequence, is a result of billions of years of evolution, and it's worked on design and manufacture of objects, systems, materials and structures that we can then learn from. So we can copy, we can imitate, we can learn from parts of natural systems such as objects in the left, these tiny little skeletons that can be used in medicine, for example, to structures, these fine little hairs that cover the skin of a lizard, to complex or compound materials, and this is nacre on the bottom left. So what is the process of carrying out biomimetics or doing biomimetics? So nature is the model, we study them, and the process is to take important lessons from nature to solve all sorts of problems we face, any kind of problem. And I will explain what I mean by how it can be applied to everything that we do, not only technology and science and medicine. So nature is a measure, and it can be used to judge the validity of innovations. It's very good at instructing us on what works in various contexts of other things, and it shows us what is lasting. So those are really key kind of fundamental aspects of nature that we can learn from. So nature is a mentor, and it reconnects us with nature and recommends us to learn and work with nature as well. So there's an untapped wisdom from nature that we can learn from. So the broad and significant impact of biomimetics in our lives, now and in the future, can be kind of put into these kind of statements. So it's very fundamental and it's very profound, and it has a profound impact on humanity, and it enables us to address some of the biggest challenges we face. How we will shift away from industrialized agribusiness, for example, and to feed ourselves safely. For example, there's biomimetic techniques being used to in farming to fit farming techniques to land usage and land processes and natural processes, and to fit those into landscapes and the environment. So there's a lesson there in, for example, farming, in agriculture, where people are looking at biomimetics to design agriculture to be the same, for example, as the natural cycle of natural prairies, how they develop and evolve. So how can we harness other more potent energy sources? We can learn from nature to do that, capturing light from the sun as the leaf does. So these are examples where we face major challenges. Ecological damage, bad farming practices, bad agricultural practices that lead to pollution, lead to degradation of biodiversity. We can relearn some lessons from nature and apply those to our technological and our industrial systems. So how do we make things in a better way, less wastefully, and with better function? So that's where we can learn from nature. So a lot of industrial products, a lot of technologies that we use are very wasteful in terms of the energy that is used to make them, or to even design them. And often the function is not optimized. We can learn a lot from nature to optimize those better and use less resources. So the lesson from fitting form to function, which is what nature, what biological organisms do very well. We can understand about healing ourselves in terms of nutrition, in terms of drug development, and we can gain important innovations from nature and bioprospecting projects. We can use nature in computer design to process complex information and to enable us to solve problems better, more easily and more efficiently. And we can use biomimetics also in conducting business, how we relate to each other. We can use it in industrial economies based on natural ecologies, for example. So there's a kind of an idea of having an ecology of commerce and making out business environments or commercial environments as an ecological system. There are certain caveats to biomimicry or biomimetics, is another word, another term for the biomimicry is kind of like the noun and the and biomimetics is actual, like a verb, a doing word, doing biomimetics. So there are various caveats to this. It's not all perfect. So the best ideas don't actually just mimic nature. So I talked about those explanations, those definitions of biomimetics. And biomimetics is not, I'll get to this later, but biomimetic science is not just about copying everything about nature and then trying to implement that in the technology or to solve your problem. So they borrow ideas from nature and improve upon them to produce something better than nature. So the idea of biomimetic science is not, as I said, to slavishly copy everything in nature and try to apply that to your technology or to your life, but to select key aspects from key lessons and learn those from nature and then implement them in your problem solving, your solution. So this is the real power of studying nature and learning lessons from it. I want to take this example, what I mean of the problem of, there's certain problems about learning from nature. That is, when we look at nature, we see a solution, a design, or some kind of function, and the difficulty in biomimetics and biomimetic science is trying to understand the function, what the purpose of something is in nature. So this comes down to the real kind of fundamental of biomimetics, is trying to understand adaptations and trying to understand function very well. If you understand the function, then you can take the key aspects that lead to that function and then apply that to your technology. So you have to get a really, this is the real trick of biomimetic science, is trying to understand what the function is, what the purpose is. So I put this slide up because this illustrates that point quite well. In a conference, a biomimetic conference, to a number of engineers, they were illustrating this point. They showed this picture of this bird and they asked the engineers, what's the function? Why has this bird developed a really splendid plumage? Now, to the engineer, they look at this, they try to understand this, and they figure that the feathers enhance flying. So as an engineer, they think, well, this interesting design of the feather is to do with flight. But then you kind of look at some of the natural history, the life history of this bird, then the function is not for flight, but has another function, which is to attract a mate. So that's just a very simple example of how you've got to be careful in understanding the design of function if you want to try and learn from it and then implement it in your technology or your science. There are some other caveats to biomimicry and biomimetics. So the essence of good biomimesis or biomimetics is to disentangle the threads from lots of different functions. So biology has many intertwining functions that are very difficult to tease out. So as I said in that bird of paradise example, you can look at that, you can understand something about the life history of the bird and find a function, or an adaptation I should say, to its environment. But underlying that, there are many other types of functions as well involved. So good biomimesis is about disentangling the myriad of functions that you see in nature, precisely, and use the one that's of great use to your particular problem solving. So evolution produces the best possible designs. So there's kind of a thought in biology that evolution develops functions, develops organisms that are are perfect, when that's not true. To the contrary, what it does, what evolution does, how organisms adapt to their environments, they settle on a kind of a design that is just good enough to survive. So it's not an absolute perfect kind of design, it's not a perfect construction. It's a good function for its environment and enough for it to survive. So we have to be careful when we're talking about biomimetics and learning from nature and thinking it's like a perfect way of solving something. So will biomimicry be able to deliver? So this is another key point. So I've talked about how we can learn a great deal from nature and apply it to our technologies and improve a lot of aspects of our daily lives and how we use energy and all sorts of other things. But I should say that there haven't been as many biomimicry innovations or technologies as you would expect from what I just said from that statement. So can biomimicry really deliver? Can it really deliver the kind of technologies and the materials and all sorts of other things that we need and do it well? Furthermore, we may already owe many of our present technologies to inspiration from nature. So as I said in the first statement, that it's innate in all of us. We have an appreciation for nature and natural things. Well, most of us do. And it could be said that a lot of innovations are already inspired by nature. And as one person said, or one figure said in the biomimetics field, the problem, as I see it, is that there is often a world of experimentation between a basic idea or a promising lab result, and then the scaling up of those into a commercially viable product, or something useful that we can use. So later in the talk, I will talk about the problems of converting to getting the idea from nature and then translating it into a technology. It's really not. It's a very difficult operation to do. And some of the tools and techniques I'll talk about later on in the talk will have been developed to try and smooth that translation. So from an inventor, from his mind or her mind to the real world is rarely clear. So some of those who draw inspiration from nature are aware that simple imitation alone is not necessarily the way forward. So as I said before, it's not a simple case of being inspired, learning from something and then copying everything about it and then trying to make a technology from it. So it's quite a complicated process. So there's some kind of foundation, and don't worry about too much of the technicalities. There's only a couple of take-home messages that'll be good to know from this talk. I'm just giving you as much as possible about biomimetic science, so you get a feel for the broad, and you get an idea of all the aspects of biomimetic science. So there's a lot of interest in biomimicry thinking, and it's increased in the last decade, and the practice of doing biomimetics. So, and it extends into many aspects of research now. It extends into industry, into product design, into product manufacturing, business, and it's also making its way into architecture, into business practices, and all aspects of life. So there are many conferences now being organised in this. This is one such, I think of 5 or 6 years ago. It's just a an image of their what they call a biomimetic summit, trying to bring people from all different industries together to learn about biomimetics and how they can implement that in their industry. So research, business, product design, and so forth. And when you take a look at the keywords in biomimetics, so this is generated from the literature. It shows the various areas of biomimetics that are really taking off at the moment. So robotics is probably the biggest one at the moment, where the biggest kind of area of industry, technology that's trying to do this translation from nature to technology. There's also some working on neural networks. The area of human biology and medicine is kind of gathering pace. It's not so large as the robotics. This just gives you some idea of the reach of the biomimetic kind of philosophy and ideas and ways of doing biomimetic science. So this again shows, this is just another kind of a graph showing the trend in biomimetics. So this is a graph of, in the literature, of the number of papers that mention biomimetics or have a biomimetic component to them. So from 1994 to 2014, you can see the incredible exponential increase in interest in biomimetics as determined by papers written about the subject in different key areas. So kind of the science area, in chemistry, materials engineering, and cell and molecular biology. So you can see the trend is in the scientific field more towards chemistry and materials and engineering, and less so in medicine. But that is gathering pace, and I do a lot of work and a lot of others now in the medical field, in the biology field, are using the biomimetic approaches and techniques more and more in their work. So this is just more graphs. I just want to give you a feel, an idea of what the kind of popularity or the frequency of biomimetics, biomimetic projects, just to give you an idea of where biomimetics is in society in all aspects. So there's general increases now in interest in biomimetics and using it for all sorts of problem solving and all sorts of industries and technologies. So as you can see in this one, if you take a more kind of a business approach and look at the market analysis, and it shows that biomimetics is also being used by industries, a lot of industries now, from paper manufacturing to chemical manufacturing, transportation, waste management, and chemical manufacturing, for example. So from a business point of view, it can make money as well. So commercial, as I said, commercial organisations are very serious now about biomimetics, and many dedicate resources to biomimetic ideas. They have core groups within, so a lot of big companies now have biomimetic teams, and they dedicate some resources to develop biomimetic ideas and concepts for developing new products. So, for example, Boeing, General Mills, sorts of large computer firms. I don't know about Samsung, but I'm very sure Samsung would be in this, doing the same as well in terms of computer networks, developing networks based on biomimetic ideas. I've highlighted here aerodynamics is a big area at the moment where they're looking at flight in nature, trying to learn some key lessons in improving flight. Aerodynamic design. So, for example, Airbus partners are sourcing nature, or scouring nature, for solutions to icing on airplane wings, optimization of air inlets, so it's more to improve fuel efficiency in flight, developing stronger wing fuselage joints based on birds, and an adaptive trailing edge that would end the need for wing flaps. That's another. You might have seen in some aircraft. There's I think in the latest. I can't remember whether it's latest Boeing. There are kind of you might have noticed on the end of the wingtips there's this this little tail on the end of the wingtip. That was kind of loosely inspired by some design of a bird. So in terms of commercial biomimetics, it began. One of the major ones began in 2005, where Ford and Volvo car makers developed an anti-collision system which was based on the way locusts swarm without crashing into one another. IBM designers are analysing or have analysed the way abalone shells, so seashells, form by melding microscopic particles. So they looked at the way the material was made, synthesized by these creatures, to produce better function, better performing materials. So they're applying those same principles of material synthesis on this organism to develop a series of processes based on this material, this calcium carbonate material, a very cheap material that they could source. It's still experimental, and what they found so far is that by using this material in their processes, they could reduce energy consumption by 55%. And I always like to add caveats and always look at some of the problems and difficulties of biomimetics. And every time I talk about biomimetics, and a word of caution in this commercial biomimetics is that copying natural design or trying to translate those nature ideas into a commercial product doesn't always work out. And this was one kind of example that I came across where this shoe manufacturer designed a footwear, a sole that was mimicked on some form, not complete mimic, but some form emulating this the hoof of an animal to improve grip. So functionally, I think it was fine, but people didn't like the design, so it wasn't very successful. So I like also to give a historical perspective on things, because I think that's really important to understand where you've been. It's always good to understand where you have been or the history of something in order to understand where you want to go or where we're heading to, the trends. So I just give it some historical perspective on biomimetics, because biomimetics, when you talk about biomimetics, it's really quite an old kind of idea, and I'll illustrate that. It goes back thousands of years, because we have this kind of innate appreciation for nature, and there's a lot of copying of nature, and inspiration from nature goes back thousands and thousands of years. So in modern times, it's increasingly less kind of empirical, less ad hoc, and it's become more systematic. But in history, biomimetics has been very kind of ad hoc and very much less. You couldn't call it a science. It's only recently you could call this kind of way of trying to copy nature as science, and I'll explain that a little later. So the modern biomimetics came about in 1957, and the term was coined by this guy, Otto Schmidt, who wanted to. He was a biophysicist, and he wanted to learn. So he said that biophysics is our point of view, and it's an approach to problems of biological science using the theory and technology of the physical sciences. So he wanted to try and reverse that, and conversely, biophysics could also be a biologist's approach to problems of physical science and engineering. And as he said, that was neglected at the time. So that's when the modern kind of ideas of biomimetic science came about. that goes more in the definition. I'll just skip that. So, as I said, this biomimicry is really it's in all of us. There's biomorphism. We've always looked to nature. We're always very inspired in all sorts of ways. So in terms of technology, there's ancient biomimicry. There's technologies taken from nature, learning from nature, and this is done thousands of years ago. So, for example, I've given an example here. 3,000 years ago, roughly, Chinese made artificial silk, inspired by the supreme properties of silk as a material that has no human equivalent. So we can go back 3,000 years, you can see biomimicry in action. That was more the kind of what I was talking about, that ad hoc, that empirical type of biomimicry. So it's just copying it. So from silkworms, and there's a tapestry made in the Zhou era from silk. Philosophers have looked at nature for thousands of years for inspiration, for ideas, inventions and strategies. It's nothing new. It's nothing really new. For example, Leonardo da Vinci studied bird flight and made some machines, or at least the design of the machines. He may have built one or two of these kind of machines, but a lot of the designs weren't actually built. He designed structures based on the observations and principles of bird flight. And he wrote a large book on how to translate, how to design these from birds. There are a lot of examples, later examples. So this is in the 19th century. Henry Mitchell invented an engineering pile. So this is another technology for digging holes in soil. And he did it by inspiration, by biomimetics. Again, that very kind of ad hoc way, looking at nature, looking how it's designed, and then trying simply to try and copy it as much as possible. And he was inspired by the capsules of certain seed plants because their form and structure enabled them to become buried, and they had this because of the way they were formed, the way they were designed, these seeds could actually drill themselves into the soil purely by their physical design, and that was assisted by wind and rain. So he wanted to try and translate that into technology. There are some more examples. Clement Ader developed a steam-powered aircraft, and the wings were designed based on the structure and morphology of bat wings. But that obviously, a lot of these are not in use today. They didn't take off, so that's, I was talking about the caveat. It's very difficult to do that simple inspiration and the translation to get some long-lasting technology. Here's another example of a stable wing design by Ignaz and Igor Etrich in 1904, and this again was based on a design of a seed. So this seed could, because it's the way it's physically designed, could travel quite large distances for its size and capacity. So we want to try and learn from that and try to implement human technology, of course. And then the most classic example that you might have come across, this is always held up as the great example of biomimetics working into a long-lasting technology. And this is the invention of Velcro, which was directly based on an observation. So again, it's like an ad hoc process. An observation is made from nature, and then some kind of copying has occurred. And so Velcro is an invention derived from the action of the hooked seeds of the burdock plant. And the story goes that the inventor saw this attached to, he was walking his dog in the countryside, and these seeds were attaching to the fur, and he got interested because he was an inventor, got interested in what caused this to happen, and then he then translated this into this Velcro, which is used to this day. So there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of these kind of biomimetic ideas or learning from nature ideas developed into technology. A lot of them are not long-lasting, but now increasingly they're becoming into everyday life. Another example is observation of leaves of lotus. So this is another classic example. So whenever you read books on biomimetics or maybe listen to a talk on biomimetics, so the Velcro system is always held up as the big success of this. This is another success based on the lotus leaf. So the observation is from the lotus leaf. They're always clean. So they have this super hydrophobic, they're very hydrophobic surfaces. So water does not collect on the surface, but also dirt doesn't collect on their surfaces. They're ultra clean and they're free of water. And there's some property, and the property is related to the physical structure of these leaves. So despite growing in muddy environments, they're completely clean. And so it's found that there's a nanostructure on the surface of these lotus leaves, and this directly causes this self-cleaning, this anti-wetting ability. It's principally all down to the physical structure. There's some chemistry involved, but it's mainly down to these little structures. And so this has been translated into a paint. So there's a paint that takes the principles, the design principles from this structure, and it's now commercially viable. There's paints where that have these kind of properties. This is quite a large developing field now in biomimetics, is looking at nanostructures. In nature, nano design is very important. For example, in materials design, the nanostructure is extremely important in developing not only the morphology but the properties of the bulk material, at the macro scale. So a lot of people were looking at natural surface nanotopographies for inspiration. So I talked about the anti-wetting, the self-cleaning. That can have lots of applications, and it can have applications in medicine particularly. So there's lots of people we're working on it here, on looking at natural surface nanotopographies for medical applications. So using these simple physical surface technologies. There are others, so we look at some functional structural designs, and there's a big area in biomimetics that I'm just focusing on some key areas where it's really taking off in the technology field. And it's mainly physicists and chemists at the moment that are developing these, and less so for biologists. So this is another area of photonics is really important, so looking at structural colours and the way that natural organisms have evolved, have adapted materials to deal with light, either to refract light, to concentrate light, or to create colours, so diffract light. So anti-reflective surfaces, for example, have been discovered several times in insect eyes. And these have been developed for various new technologies at the moment. There's another areas looking at attachment devices from nature. Various organisms, lots of different organisms have very good ways of attaching to surfaces, dirty surfaces and wet surfaces in particular. So and glues and adhesives are really important, because the reason is that a lot of synthetic or artificial glues and attachment systems are not up to function, especially in dirty and wet environments. And so they're turning to nature to look for design for physical engineering solutions to improve adhesives and attachment of objects. So this is one of the classic examples that will probably be mentioned in many biomimetic books or textbooks. And this is the gecko story. So the gecko has foot pads which are very adhesive, and it's primarily down to the physical structure. There's not much chemistry, so it's not like a glue system. It's not a glue adhesive. It's a structural adhesive system. So it has a wonderful ability to attach to any type of surface. You might have seen geckos attach themselves to ceilings and are able to attach to wet surfaces, dirty surfaces. So there's a lot of work going on to look at, we know a lot about the reasons, the explanations of why this adhesion occurs. So we know the design principles behind it, and now the difficulty is just trying to translate this into some kind of usable technology. So as you see, if you look at the toe pads of the gecko, right down to the nanoscale, because usually when you're looking at biological organisms, you have to go down to the nanoscale to really understand the function and the adaptation. You see these tiny little nanostructures, and so the difficulty comes in trying to synthetically manufacture these kind of structures. There's more examples, so examples in car design derived from this boxfish, for example. And as I was mentioning earlier, the wingtip idea, having a divided wingtip with wings of low aspect ratio. So this was directly inspired from looking at buzzards, large birds of prey, the design of their wings, their large wings. And this has been abstracted into a loop that reduces drag in modern aircraft. You'll probably see most of the modern aircraft have those. There are a lot of examples, and you can find hundreds of examples of this simple copying, partial understanding or almost complete understanding, and then translation into some kind of useful technology. There are lots of examples that are said to be biomimetic but really aren't. So this is what I call that's what I mean by dubious examples or apocryphal biomimetic examples. So these are not true examples of learning from nature into some kind of design. So this is the classic example. There was a design of a building in the 19th century, designed by Joseph Paxton, and it was claimed that this intricate design of this building was based on the leaf of the giant water lily. It has these wonderful arrangements of struts, and that gives it a very good mechanical performance. And people say that he was inspired to design this building with similar kind of structural performance was based on that, which wasn't true. So you'll find lots of examples where. So this illustrates the problem of biomimetics and how it can be. And there's another example that the Eiffel Tower was the way the struts and the mechanical design. Again, we're talking about engineering designs based on from natural examples, and it was claimed that the design of this Eiffel Tower was based on the struts in the bone, the human bone. So those struts give the wonderful mechanical, at least in compression, the properties of bone, hardness and toughness of bone. So the problem, and another problem with that translation process, if we're going to look at it more scientifically, in a more scientific way, solving problems among biology, in nature, is very different to the way problems are solved in engineering. two different kind of approaches or mindsets, if you will. So this is important to kind of grasp in some way, because if we understand the differences, then we can then come to some kind of resolution and make that translation process easier. So in biology, problems are solved, and I mean problems of designing function and surviving and creating some design. So in biology, mostly descriptive, and it produces multiple classifications. So in engineering design, the approach is there's a lot of decision making. It tends to be very prescriptive, and immediately strong rules are developed and strong rules and regulations are developed. So when you're doing engineering, that's the process you go through. In biology, it's a little bit more looser. It's more descriptive, classifications, databases are produced. So one thing that they both have in common, though, is the ability to resolve technical conflicts. So this is a kind of important point when we're looking at how to translate from nature to technology. So what do I mean by technical conflicts and resolutions? So there's kind of a philosophical point, is that every problem, so we're trying to solve problems, and we're looking at nature and see how in nature problems are solved. It can be any kind of problem, whether to make a material or to do a particular function. So if we want to learn that, we want to understand the idea that for any problem, there's going to be, to solve that problem, there are worsening features and there are improving features. So there's always advantages and disadvantages to everything. So every problem you try to solve, whatever way you try to solve that, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages. There's going to be improving features and there are going to be worsening features in everything you do. And how to come to a good resolution, how to come to a good decision or come to a good resolution. And that's what I mean by conflicts. There's conflict in everything. So there's always a good and a bad. There's always a conflict between multiple elements whenever you're trying to make a decision or to solve a problem. So that's what I mean by trying to resolve technical conflicts. So there's a philosophy of trying. I didn't want to get too much into philosophy, but biology and to some extent engineering are very good at weighing up the good and the bad related to that particular solution or way of solving a problem, and trying to optimize the two and get to some kind of good resolution that minimizes the bad effects and increases the good effects that solve the problem. So I wanted to highlight the differences between nature and technology in the way that this what I call conflict resolution takes place. So trying to find an optimal solution that reduces the problems associated with solving that problem. So in living biological and natural systems, they operate with relatively narrow conditions of temperature, pressure, environment, low use of energy, very little use of electromagnetic fields, although there's a body of work now looking at natural phenomena, and there seems to be some interest in that a lot of organisms use magnetic fields in some way. But there's low use of radiation and low temperature is the way. Whereas, so where you compare in technology, for example, in non-living technical systems, in human engineering, in artificial systems. They operate in a much wider variety of conditions, beyond the tolerance of most living creatures, living organisms. So we use high energy electromagnetic fields, very often lasers, high radiation, extreme temperatures and pressures. So the point I want to get at is that we want to try and, so the learning process from nature, if we want to apply it to human technology, is trying to use these kind of processes, this kind of way of solving problems, so with low pressure, room temperature, low temperatures of room temperature, and use less energy, for example. We want to try and use those kind of ways of developing technology, trying to apply those to human technology. So try and use less of high rate of radiation and high temperatures, for example, trying to use those in our technical systems, our artificial systems. So living systems keep a very good balance, they have a very good homeostatic control. And this is due to very tight, closed cycles of energy and substance. They're very good at controlling energy and substance and apportioning energy and substance in key areas of the system and optimizing that. In human technology, we're not so good at doing that kind of thing. So we want to try and implement that kind of process in artificial systems, in human technology, so we can improve our energy efficiency. So in biology, evolution tends to be very slow. So the development of new designs or adaptations are very slow. And the plus point in human engineering, it's much faster, very fast, and developments accelerate. In natural systems, however, there's much more long-term sustainability, and they're much more long-lasting than technical systems, human engineering systems, which have a very short-term effectiveness, but tend to, so their performance tends to reduce over long periods of time. So that's another area we can learn from nature and apply it to our technical systems. And slow processes in biology are widespread, so processes tend to be sort of growing materials is much slower compared with our systems of making materials, much faster. There's lots of kind of contrasts when you compare biology with human engineering. So there's a lot of examples where we can learn how to use those advantageous ones, and some of those I described, and apply them to human technical systems. So, what can biomimetics do for you? So when this question is asked to scientists, for example, what scientists want from biomimetics? When they were asked this question, this was some kind of conference or panel to discuss the use and development of biomimetics. So scientists will use biology as an inspiration for all sorts of science endeavours. What they want from learning from nature is to develop low energy systems, so to reduce the amount of energy used to develop biological ideas or technologies, or other physical, in physics or in engineering. They want to have more cohesiveness, more fusion of various different scientific concepts, and they want to have novel analyses from new ideas. So they want novel ways of drawing in different concepts from all different aspects of science, and drawing into more themes that they can implement, rather than have disparate concepts and ideas. very difficult to analyse separately. When this same question was asked to industrialists, so this is a kind of broad panel of people drawn to this conference who are kind of interested in biomimetics and trying to implement them in their different fields. So when you ask the industrialists, they want more multifunctional materials. They want to develop materials that have more than one or two functions, and in biology, materials have lots of different functions, and they're designed that way, down to the nanoscale. They want novel processing routes, new ways of processing materials and substances and substrates, and they want low energy usage. So they want, so industries always wanted to make want to be more and more cost effective, and having to use less energy is very important for them. And adaptability due to functionality, so making design, engineering design, have more adaptability and versatility. And again, you can go back, you can turn to nature and you can see there it is, there's a lot of versatility, there's a lot of multifunctionality that can be, that's always intrinsic to nature, to organisms. And then this is wrong, it's not scientists, but this was asked to general public, so people kind of not with a specific in a specific area or industry or technology. So there was a number of interested general public at this forum. So that's not scientists, general public, and they were asked that question: what do they want from this biomimetics? They want easy understanding of basic concepts. So they want to better understand what biomimetics is all about. They want to see from biomimetics better materials and structures for everyday use. They want more easy recycling capacity, so they're very interested in the sustainability. It's kind of the green idea, having sustainable products that don't affect the ecosystem as much as they do today. And then, again, this one comes up, low energy usage. So when you ask that question for those groups, what biomimetics could really do, in those three sets of the scientists, the industrialists, the engineers, and the general public, there's one commonality. They all want to see less energy usage, or less use of the Earth's resources to create technologies and stuff. And that's a key point. I think that's one of the key areas where if you're not interested or you don't subscribe to the biomimetic kind of philosophy or theme, or I think that's one of the biggest kind of focus where biomimetics could really, really help society and technology and industries, also in every sphere of life, is using less resources, using low energy. And biology, organisms do that phenomenally well. And that's probably the key area where we can learn the most from the biomimetic approach. So this is the biomimicry of resource and energy efficiency, and efficient partitioning of resources, and using less substance, less material, less energy. So this is probably the biggest take-home message that I think you can get right now from biomimicry. So in an existing economy, so I just wanted to just briefly illustrate this. So in our existing economy, resources are used which are really quite cheap now, still. And so there tends to be a less of an incentive to use them carefully and economically. And this results in bad design. So I've illustrated these, what I think are pretty awful designs. This is architectural design, just to illustrate that point. So on the left, this is a monstrosity built in Bangkok, and I can't remember this. So this is where you have a lot of cheap resources, and that's what we have at the moment. We have a lot of cheap resources, cheap oil and resources dug from the ground. So in industry. But when you look at natural systems, they don't act like that. They don't behave like that. They have a different kind of way of doing things. So in natural systems, they apportion. I shouldn't say they. There's an apportioning or partitioning of energy between functions very efficiently in strategies for the design of their materials, their structures, mechanisms and functions. So there's more focus on using resources very carefully, much more carefully than we do at the moment. And that gives rise to better design and it gives to better functionality. So that's probably the low energy usage and better design functionality. So this is the energy resourcefulness that we can get from learning from nature. So this use of biomimetics at the moment it's a very broad philosophy, and it can enter into every sphere of life. And I think it's a really fundamental approach. But we have a contradiction. If we're going to apply it to our own sphere of life and trying to make our own kind of unique existence, is that nature does not have most of the functions that we want to engineer, we want to design for ourselves. Or we can derive them or evolve them. So we're striving to fulfill certain principles from nature, which I call life's principles in fabrication, engineering, and design of useful objects. So often we're faced with problems, or we want to solve problems in a way that nature has not come up with any kind of function or solution. So we'll come across many of those. So if we look for these kind of problems, these complex problems, we look at the principles of how life has generated functionality, has generated designs and different types of materials, and we use those principles and then apply them to our own engineering. So we go beyond to large complex systems, higher orders of organisation, and to a large ecosystem. So people are analysing biological complex systems at all levels of organisation, a hierarchy, and even to an ecosystem level, and try to understand what principles underlie all these systems in biology. Find the principles, the mechanisms, and then take those out and then use them when you're trying to engineer something or make a new material, or do something synthetically or artificially. So that approach is not about copying something that's already there in nature, but using the principles. So this is a table generated by, there's a key person in biomimicry who's really kind of one of the key figures, Jane Benyus from the US, has really has kind of pioneered biomimetics and written books and tried to explain it to not scientists but everyone, general public, trying to develop these life's principles that we can use in any sphere of life. It's not that simply that copying something that's already there in nature, but using these life principles. So I've said a lot of good things about biology and the life. And so, highlighted here are some of the key principles that we can learn and implement. So, for example, organisms, life forms are very attuned and responsive to their local environment. They integrate lots of cyclical processes, with those feedback systems, and they're very resilient. So these are kind of features and functions that really important. We can develop and use in our technologies. They optimize rather than maximize. So that goes back to that point of energy resourcefulness. So in technology and industry, we're very wasteful of resources, of energy and resources. We try to maximize everything. Even in design of structures and buildings and materials, they're over-designed for safety reasons. But nature does it a different way. They go for more optimization, more careful designs. There's some things we can learn from that. They foster, this is really important, they foster independence. So this self-principle. So they can, so these even inanimate, or what you think of inanimate biomaterials, can have properties of self. They can self-repair, they can redesign, reorganize autonomously. And that would be a really, really interesting design functionality to have in our own synthetic materials. So there's a number of research looking at self-repairing materials, for example, and taking the principles from organisms to manufacture those. And in nature there's a benign manufacturer, so that self-principle, there's a lot of self-assembly. So a lot of biology actually not only uses obviously the genetic and the cell components to build structures or materials or natural technologies, but they co-opt physical processes and chemical processes. So biology co-opts those physical processes. So, for example, the self-assembly is one, and self-organization is probably the better term for it. So we can apply those principles to technology in various ways. So this biomimetics is really kind of, it's permeating every aspect of technology, of science, and industry, construction, architecture. And in the kind of the more scientific fields, and particularly materials at the moment, material science is really taking a lot of inspiration, a lot of kind of ideas from nature. And so I'm just going to illustrate some of these next few slides. So material scientists are interested in nature because they learn from nature's best types of materials. And a lot of these materials have properties that cannot be made artificially or synthetically. They have a combination of functions that and novel ways of combining these functions together that have no human comparison, that have no engineered comparison. So a lot of material scientists have actually turned to nature to try and replicate these superior types of materials. So one of these superior materials, you've probably heard of it, very, very popular, very frequent in the materials science field is silk. So it has a incredible combination of properties, these superior performance. So it's super strong. So there are various ways of trying to mimic this and learn from it. So that the chemistry and the physical the design of the silk is known about. And the process now is to try and translate that. So spider, in particular, spider dragonite silk has a really super strong, so it has equivalence to high tensile steel. It's probably but it's much cheaper to make and has other important properties that steel doesn't. So this silk is made up of proteins in semi-crystalline structures, which give strength and amorphous segments. So it has a crystalline and an amorphous, it's a composite combination that give flexibility. So it has strength and flexibility at the same time, which is very difficult to engineer, to put those two combinations together. Another one is looking at shark skin. So this is what's called a super fast property. The short fin mako shark can reach speeds of up to 16 miles an hour, and this is really strongly aided by the design of the skin surface, which reduces turbulence and microturbulence. So it gives that streamlining effect and reduces physical forces that lead to drag on the swimming shark. So it goes down to a nano property. So there's a number of researchers looking at the design of shark skin to try and develop a synthetic replicate of this. So this is an illustration of what that nano architecture does. It reduces drag, it reduces the production of these eddy currents. Right, this is at the boundary layer of the skin. So it's always important in the material science to look at this kind of scale, because it has huge implications, has huge effects at the macro scale. There's another one. This is the super dry example. So there's an example in nature where, based on the pine cone, people are looking to, particularly in this example is in textiles. They're trying to copy the mechanism of pine cone, how it opens out and closes depending on the environment, on the humidity of the environment. So they're trying to replicate that and make textiles that have this self property, able to open up in high humidity and then close in low humidity. So the pine cone has two different layers which reacts differently to changes in humidity. So it elongates, and then there's a resistance to similar process, and it's very similar to the operation of a thermostat. So there's some textiles. This is an example of textile wall. This is a very kind of basic interpretation of that pine cone structure, but it has a similar functionality. So these woolen spike structures based on that pine cone open when the wearer would sweat, so when the humidity increases, these little things open out and allow air to flow through and reduce the humidity. And then when it's in a dry state, they close up again. And I've talked about the gecko skin, and there's lots of material science and technologists working on this super sticky, this attachment of the gecko, trying to replicate that. And I talked about the super clean example, lotus leaf, and there's others looking at in this example. There's a surface found that it's a slippery surface. There's no substance that will actually attach to the surface. It's a super clean surface, and it's based on this carp of a carnivorous plant. That kind of design. So this we have this too much in detail on this. And a lot of that, those slides I've talked about before. And so there's some more kind of ancient biomimetics examples here. And this one was particularly related to my own field. I'll talk about very soon about biomimetics in medical science and technology, regenerative medicine, tissue engineering. It's kind of my field. There are lots of examples, and even again we go back to ancient civilizations where biomimetics has been used in kind of a medical context. And this is one example I like to highlight. This is ancient Mayans used to. It's a very crude type of biomimetics. It's not the biomimetic science that I've been talking about, but it's where they use nacre as a replacement tooth. And nacre has this wonderful property when it's inserted into living human bone into a defect. The bone will not. There won't be any immunological reaction to the nacre, and it will fuse to the bone. The bone will actually grow onto the nacre very tightly, which is a phenomenal property. That was used by the ancient Mayans thousands of years ago. Now I just turn to the biomimetics in medicine and surgery, which I see more interesting to you, and it's the area I'm using biomimetics very strongly in virtually everything I do, in the work I do. So biomimetics in medicine and surgery. So I have to be careful when talking about biomimetics because medicine is inherent. It's biomimetic in itself. So we're looking at human biology, and we're trying to copy something about it when we're doing interventions, or we're trying to engineer devices or some kind of solution in medicine. It's always biomimetic because we're trying to deputize the human biology, or we're trying to modify it in some way, or improve it, or to regenerate it in some way. So biomimetics is part of medicine anyway. So direct copying of human tissues and organs is an approach. It's a biomimetic approach. There's another approach which takes inspiration from not only human biology, but also from nature itself. So copying of zoological and botanical structures. So that's another kind of biomimetics. And biomimetics can be very broad in its approaches. So in medicine, this is another route we can take biomimetics. So look at natural structures and natural design and try and implement those in medicine and surgery. So it's quite recent kind of developments, and there are a number of companies that are looking at organisms, animals and plants to design and build structures and machines and devices for medical applications. There are two examples here of natural models that are being used. In particularly, learning from nature, from other organisms, can be very useful in developing new exoprostheses, implants and devices. So we're obviously not talking about trying to replicate human biology itself, but we're trying to develop technologies that can be used in medicine. So the purposes of significance in medical device engineering. So we can learn a lot from nature. So as an example, in the surgical field, there are a number of mechanisms that we could use in medicine and surgery. We can have in surgery we can have better cutting tools, we need better gripping tools, suction devices, drilling machines, and crushing devices to improve the way surgery is done. And you can learn, and I pick on these kind of just as an example, we can learn a lot from nature, from other organisms, how to design cutting devices that minimize, say, tissue damage in surgery, or gripping devices, drilling devices that minimize, get a clean kind of section through, say bone or some kind of tissue. So there's lots of lessons that can be learned from nature to develop new technologies that can improve surgery. So there's a number of companies actually developing these, and I'll illustrate a couple of them. So this is a drilling machine evolved, adapted in nature, in zoology. So this is a parasitic fig wasp. It has this ovipositor, so it's a device for laying eggs, and it drills into the fig fruit, and it's a very effective kind of drilling machine into the material. And they looked at the design of this, and they found that it had a serrated zinc enriched tip, so it's like a jagged kind of. We'll look at the SCM in the next slide. It's this serrated design, this very carefully designed tip, and this serration and has a zinc coating. So this was an inspiration for. That was a different. Sorry, I thought I had an SEM of this particular thing. So they were looking at this because they wanted to kind of improve upon a drilling device for using, I think it was bone surgery they were looking at, that minimizes damage, and you can create very accurate, precise incisions into bone. So we're looking at this device, this as an inspiration, and they've designed a tool that they've developed a tool which can be used in surgery. There's another one, this is a suction machine from squid, which has a cavity and flexible sides with these concentric microgrooves. So this is a very soft material, and a number of researchers are looking at this suction device for using in surgery, maybe to attach kind of monitoring devices to the skin, for example. There's crushing machines for crushing certain tissues, like bone tissue. Looking at some organisms with very good crushing devices. So this is a coconut crab. It has a very strong grip and is able to crush materials. And this one has actually been made into a tool that's been used in certain surgeries. So this is another biomimetic device, and this is another drill which emulates the. So there's another insect that has that drilling kind of mechanism, and they've actually designed a tool which is very strongly directly based on the design. So it's physical design. There's nothing more chemistry, no biology involved, but it's the physical design of this structure. So this is a parasitic wasp that is able to dig in through, drill a very precise holes into the exoskeleton of its prey. So this is actually in surgeries. And there's a bone punch that's been designed on the jaw mechanism. Yeah, I think that they based it on the design of the jaw mechanism of this cat. Not this particular cat, but the cat design. And this has been developed so it's a tool for punching bone. And then there's another insect inspiration. So this is based on a lot of insects, obviously parasitic, and a lot of them also drawing blood of mammals. So this is one insect, and so they looked at the design of how it's able to draw in blood, and as you know, when you get bitten, these companies like mosquitoes, there's no pain felt, and it's able to precisely enter into a vein and draw out blood. So they wanted to look at the functional design of this and try and replicate it in some, and this is what they came up with, some metals. This is a design based on that proboscis, and they're using it as a way of painless collection of blood from patients. So I'll quickly touch on, I won't go into too much detail now, the problem-solving techniques, so making that translation. So I've talked about a lot of examples where nature is looked at, is for design, for functionality, and there are other ways of looking at nature and trying to understand what problems have been solved and how to translate solutions to problems that have been developed in nature, and how to translate those into technology. So there's lots of examples what I've shown where they've looked at nature and then studied the structure and some of the biology and the physics and the chemistry. There are other ways to do that translation, and it's using in a more systematic way, and using these kind of tools. So there's various mathematical tools, statistical tools, and algorithms that you can use to solve complex problems. So when you have a problem that you can't see a natural model, for example, you can actually use these tools to find a solution for your problem. So you have a problem and you don't see any relation in nature, you don't see any solution to that, or obvious solution in nature. You can use these kind of tools, which are based on problem-solving processes in nature in general. So, so a lot of those examples I'm talking about is where biomimetics is empirical. So it's based on observations and then some kind of detailed study, scientific engineering studies, material studies, and looking at physics and chemistry. And so they're based on a lot of observations and some experimental testing, and then inferences are made about the design and function. So there is a systematic approach where they've developed tools which, so this systematic approach is based on a framework. So it's actually a database of all the solutions that nature has come to resolution, has solved. As many as we are aware of right now, they're still adding to that framework. So a framework is needed to implement what we call functional analogies from nature. So what I mean, so you have a problem, it can be any problem, it can be a scientific problem, it can be a problem in business or manufacturing or in industry. You have a problem, and then you can go to this framework, this system that has all the solutions that nature's resolved before, and then you can try and you can use this system to pick out solutions that are relevant to the problem that you have. So this is what these tools and frameworks are for. So there's a number of these which are based on mathematical set theory and all this kind of thing. So there are simple ones called biomimicry taxonomies, which is like just a big database. So all the facts from nature are kind of put into a database. So every kind of observation, every kind of solution, every kind of function is put into a big database. And then you can access that database and find a similar kind of solution to the problem that you're trying to solve. The way nature has previously solved it. There's quite a few of these, and they're quite mathematical, and I'm not going to. One of them that I really like to use, and it's really a powerful method, is one of these systematic biomimetic techniques. It's called TRIZ. That's kind of an acronym. So some derived from derived from a Russian method for problem solving. So I think he was a mathematician or physicist, developed this way of solving problems, had this kind of logical system, algorithm, a mathematical system of logic that you can use to solve any kind of problem. So it's TRIZ, and it's called the Russian Method for Problem Solving. It was invented by Russian in 1917, I think it was. So what it is a collection of techniques and tools to work out a definition of the problem that you have. It can be any problem. And what it does, it puts it in functional terms and then provides a way to get an innovative solution. It's a problem-solving method, and it's constructed. So originally, it was constructed from thousands of patent inventions, so human invention. So he collected as many patents as possible, took years of research, and he tried to look at what patterns there were in these patents of how problems were solved, all sorts of different functions. This has been adapted to biology, so there's a database now created, not of patent inventions, but all the inventions that are known about in nature, all the solutions to problems in nature being put into a database. We don't obviously know every single problem that's been solved in nature, but all the ones that we have studied, we know, we have facts and explanations from. So it's like a big database system. You can pick out a solution to a problem that's similar to the problem that you want to solve. So this is a very powerful system. This is just a simple kind of cartoon of how this TRIZ process can be applied to biology. So you define a problem, you're trying to understand the problem, what are the what's called contradictions, so that's the conflicts in the problem. There's always conflicts in every kind of situation, every problem. So you want to come to some sort of resolution of those conflicts. So you define the problem. So in this example, we look at so we define a problem, say, how to climb a tree. So we're trying to find ways of innovating on how to climb a tree. So we're going to take solutions from nature to help us solve that problem of how to climb a tree. Or how to grip on ice. There's another. So there's two problems there. So we define that problem as how do we attach to a surface while moving. So in both cases, that's kind of a way of kind of understanding the problem. So you go to the next stage, you uncover the contradictions on how to climb a tree or how to grip on ice. So there's a table so it gets a little bit mathematical, but there's tables then you can relate to. And these tables have the nature solutions that can resolve these conflicts. So in this example, so how to climb a tree. So there are a set of principles, solutions from nature that we can look at. So there's one called segmentation, there's one called local quality, or add another dimension, and then it has an explanation of what those functions mean. So these are solutions that we can use to climb a tree. We can use segmentation in our design. So in the case of, for example, the cat's very good at climbing a tree. It has a paw with several pads, so that's segmentation. Local quality, and then adding another dimension, so adding more dimensions to the paw, so the design of the paw in 3D. So by doing this kind of process, iterating this process, you can come to a collection of solutions that nature has already provided or has some kind of resolution to, and you can draw those out and use those to solve your problem. So it just goes like that, and then TRIZ system, you can use biology as the inspiration. You can also draw in those patents as well and combine the two to get a really good resolution to the problem. So you compare the biological, engineering, and then come to some sort of biomimetic solution. So that's that theory of inventive problem solving. So you invent using rules and principles derived directly from nature. As I said, it's a step-by-step methodology to some kind of ideal solution. It can be used in any problem you have. It can be used to resolve that problem. And it integrates information from many sources where inventions have successfully taken place. So that's not only human technology but also through biology. So this methodology is just exemplified by this. So you have your problem. The TRIZ is like a prism. So the problem goes through the prism. It generates the different sets of sub-problems, and then it matches up solutions. And these solutions are derived from biology. And then you match those up, so the problem to the solution, and then you get that grand solution at the end. So what it does, it narrows the search of all the solutions in biology. It makes it manageable so that you can get to a focused solution to the problem. And there's another component, there's lots of different component tools in this TRIZ system, and one of these is this second one, which is an algorithm system. I won't go into the detail now because it gets really kind of laborious at the moment. And then there's another methodology that's been developed, which is based on, which uses that TRIZ system. It's another way of organising solutions from nature into a way that you can then implement in your problem solving. And this is called an ontology, so developing biomimetic ontologies. So it's a good way of representing nature, which is very hierarchical. So an ontology is it's a database that it's not just like a classification system, normal database. What it also does, it shows the relationships between the different elements or components in the database. So a normal database doesn't show you how they're related or interrelated. It's like just a classification system. So this ontology is being developed to try and have this interrelationships, and you can then come to some kind of pragmatic solution. So this one representation using the biomimetic ontology system. So it's a graphical manifestation of that database system with all the interrelationships. So people design these so that they're more accessible, so you can have your problem, and then you can generate a pathway to a solution from your central problem. So the central problem is in the middle. So this is a biomimetic system ontology. It's a way of trying to work out a solution to a problem using this pathway. And then trade-off analysis is another way of trying to understand biological problem solving. But I won't go into the detail of the trade-off. But that's just another way, another system of trying to understand the conflicts that have been solved in a problem, and the way nature has solved the conflicts. But I talked about conflicts. You can also call it trade-off. It's always a trade-off. It's probably a better, more understandable way of talking about what I mean, talking about conflicts. So there's conflicts, you try and resolve, and trying to find a synthesis to those two conflicts to create a good solution but it's like a trade-off. I mean, in everything in life, there's always a trade-off when you're trying to come to some resolution or solve a problem. So it's looking from that aspect. And there's various ways of kind of analysing trade-offs in nature. And why trade-offs are really important is that that's how biodiversity has come about. It's come through trade-offs. So, learning lessons from nature. So we'll talk about biomimetics. So bio-inspiration is another term used, a way of learning from nature. So biomimetics is more kind of the more direct way. Bio-inspiration is kind of where you use elements from nature to solve a problem. So nature is a consummate inventor, designer, architect, which is guided by natural selection, which acts on the cells and the genes. The objective of biomimetics is to emulate and simulate parts of biology that can be applied in technology. Bio-inspiration, as I said, is the purpose to harness aspects of biology, design, mechanisms, processes, similar to biomimetics, and copying them using more of human technology. So it's a less direct approach. So it's very broad philosophy. There's lots of kind of aspects to it. But I think it's quite a fundamental approach on how we to science, to everything. I think to technology, and the problem-solving systems that we can learn from nature can be applied to everything in life. Almost everything, I should say. Copying, emulating, and simulating human biology with different degrees of accuracy and functions. We can enhance technical functions in all aspects using biomimetic approaches. It can be used in medicine, engineering, so we've looked at, this is more kind of the tissue generation stuff we messed up. So we've covered a huge amount, and I hope you don't mind that we've covered so much, but I just wanted to give you kind of as much as possible about biomimetics and to give you an idea of, it's not just a simple kind of, let's look at nature, let's copy it, and we'll get some wonderful solution or some wonderful kind of result. But it's a little bit more nuanced. There's lots of complications. There's lots of ways of doing it, of implementing biomimetic philosophy. And the actual process is very challenging, and it's very difficult. But there's now, trying to explain it, there's now kind of a much more systematic and scientific approach to biomimetics. It's not so ad hoc and empirical. There's more of a science to it, so it can be used in many more different areas, more life spheres. So we've talked about the differences between nature and technology. We've looked at energy resourcefulness, which I think is one of the key kind of aspects that I think biomimetics can give us. And then I've just touched on the medical context, biomedical context. That's still really developing at the moment. And it's still a little bit more challenging than some of the other areas like the in industry and technology, where it's kind of gathering more pace, and it's more kind of there are more good results and outcomes now. But it's really kind of powering on in kind of your field in medicine and my field in genetic medicine. So thank you for listening.